She thought she'd inherited nothing but a ruined riverside cabin and a letter from an uncle she never met. But the night she heard water whispering beneath the floor, she lifted one wooden plank and found something that changed everything. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story will reveal a miracle you'll never forget. Vermont wore its melancholy like a second skin that morning. Gray clouds hung low above the small town of Maplewood, and the scent of thawing snow drifted through the air. The winter frost was beginning to loosen its grip, but the roads were still wet and slick, and the sun struggled to pierce the pale veil of mist hanging over the valley. Inside Maple Creek Diner, the ceiling fan hummed lazily, scattering the scent of old coffee and buttered toast. Clara Jennings, 28, stood behind the counter, refilling a pot of stale coffee that no one wanted. She was a slender woman with chestnut brown hair always tied low at the nape of her neck, fair skin, touched by fatigue, and eyes the color of river glass, pale green with hints of gray. Her movements were neat and practiced the reflexes of someone who had spent too long in the rhythm of serving, smiling, and surviving. There was grace in her quietness, a strength disguised as softness. Clara's co-workers often said she was too calm for this world. In truth, she wasn't calm, she was tired. Life had pressed her into stillness the way water polishes a stone. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 17, leaving her to raise her younger sister June, then a child of 12. Years of double shifts and unpaid bills had drained away her youth in thin, invisible layers. Yet she never complained. It wasn't in her nature. She carried her burdens like the river carried silt, slowly, without choice. That morning the diner was quieter than usual. A trucker in a flannel jacket sat near the window, tapping his spoon on the counter. From the kitchen came the distant hiss of eggs on a pan. Then Marty Geller, the owner, emerged through the swing door. Marty was in his 50s, his thinning hair tucked under a grease-stained cap, his flannel shirt stretched tightly over a growing belly. He avoided Clara's eyes, which was how she knew before he spoke. "Clara," he began, rubbing his neck, "I'm real sorry about this. You've been here longer than anyone, but times are rough. The winter's killed our business, and, well, I gotta let someone go." Clara set the coffee pot down carefully, the way one sets down something fragile. "You mean me?" He nodded, guilt flashing across his face. "You'll get a week's pay and a reference. You've been a blessing here, you know that." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Blessings don't pay rent, Marty." He looked away. "If I could keep you, I would." That was the end of it. No shouting, no pleading, just the silence of resignation. Clara had learned that when life took something from you, it rarely waited for permission. By afternoon, she walked home beneath a sky the color of wet slate. Her apartment sat on the upper floor of a colonial house that had long lost its pride. Paint peeled like dry bark, and the stairs groaned beneath her feet. The rent was due in 3 days, and her savings, what little remained, were tucked inside a chipped ceramic mug labeled June's College Fund. She stopped at the row of mailboxes by the entrance. Only one envelope lay inside cream-colored heavy paper, her name printed neatly in black ink, Clara Jennings. The return address was typed at the corner law offices of Harlan & Co. Burlington VT. Curiosity prickled at the back of her neck. She hadn't spoken to anyone in Burlington since her father's funeral. At her kitchen table, she slit the envelope open with a butter knife. A faint smell of paper and cedar rose from it. The letter began in formal type, but it was the name within that stopped her hand mid-air. "Dear Ms. Jennings, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Arthur Jennings of Maple Hill, Vermont. You have been identified as his next of kin and the sole beneficiary of his estate. Arthur Jennings." The name meant nothing to her. The estate consists of approximately 12 acres of land along the Maple Creek Riverbank, including a single residence. Enclosed, you will find an item left specifically for you. She reached into the envelope and drew out a folded piece of paper, an old map, yellowed and frayed at the edges. Streams and ridges were drawn in faded ink, and at the bottom, in handwriting distinct from the printed letter, were the words, "Beneath the river, the roots still live." Clara read the line twice. The handwriting was strange, steady, deliberate, as if each word carried weight. She turned the map over. On the back, a faint sketch of a cabin appeared beside the outline of a river bend, labeled Maple Hill. She leaned back in her chair, staring at it. The radiator hissed softly behind her. "Who are you, Arthur?" she murmured aloud. The question hung unanswered. She spent the rest of the evening pacing between the table and the window. Outside, snow flurries drifted past the street lamp. Inside, her thoughts circled the same loop, a man she'd never known, a property she'd never seen, and a message that sounded more like a riddle than an inheritance. Beneath the river, the roots still live. That night, she didn't sleep well. Her dreams were a collage of water and wood roots twisting beneath a black current, branches reaching toward a dim sky. She woke before dawn, her heart drumming in rhythm with something she couldn't name. The next day, the wind came from the north, sharper and colder. Clara decided to call the number listed on the letter. The secretary who answered confirmed the details. Yes, the property is legitimate. Yes, she is the only heir. No, there are no debts attached. The woman's voice softened slightly as she added, "Mr. Jennings was a quiet man, Ms. Jennings. He built that house himself by the river. No electricity, no phone. Folks said he lived close to the land." Clara thanked her and hung up. She stood at the window for a long time, staring at the frozen branches outside. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the weariness, something stirred a fragile pulse of curiosity, or perhaps hope. She wasn't sure which. Miles away in the wooded valley near Maple Hill, a man crouched by a shallow stream, adjusting the dial on a metal instrument that buzzed faintly in his hands. Ethan Walker, 33, had the rugged composure of someone who'd spent years outdoors. His hair was sandy blonde, his jaw unshaven, and his gray jacket bore mud stains from a dozen field assignments. Ethan was a civil engineer under contract with the state, surveying the underground water system before the planned construction of a new hydroelectric dam. But something about this site unsettled him. The readings made no sense. Every few minutes the sensors spiked erratically, as though something below the ground was moving, not water, but pressure. Living pressure. He'd seen strange things in his career caves that hummed in wind wells, that whispered when empty, but nothing like this. Ethan stood brushing mud from his gloves. His assistant, Caleb Myers, a young technician, barely 22, called from the truck nearby. "Anything good, boss?" Ethan shook his head. "Good, no. Interesting, definitely." He looked across the valley where the Maple Creek bent sharply its current silver under the fading daylight. Beyond that bend, hidden by the forest, lay the Jennings property. The name appeared on his survey map, though he didn't recognize it. Just another forgotten tract of land destined to vanish under a dam reservoir, unless someone said otherwise. Ethan glanced down at the water. It was cold, running stronger than it should at this time of year. He placed a gloved hand against the soil, feeling a faint vibration like the pulse of something buried. "Roots," he muttered to himself. "Deep ones." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and iron. Overhead, the last light of the day flickered through the trees like breath through ribs. Somewhere not far away, in a quiet apartment in Maplewood, Clara unfolded the map again and traced her finger along the hand-drawn river, unaware that the same current ran beneath Ethan's boots. The river, patient and unseen, connected them both long before they would ever meet. And beneath its surface, the roots still lived. The morning sky over Vermont was streaked with thin veins of white cloud, the kind that foretold rain before dusk. Clara Jennings gripped the steering wheel of the old Honda Civic as it rattled along the narrow rural road toward Maple Hill. The heater struggled against the late winter chill, and the smell of wet pine drifted in through a cracked window. In the passenger seat sat June Jennings, 12 years old, small for her age, but bright-eyed and talkative, wrapped in an oversized red hoodie that swallowed her thin frame. She was a quiet storm of curiosity, always sketching things she didn't understand. Her dark hair framed a pale, freckled face, and her manner carried the same stubborn kindness that Clara had spent her life protecting. June leaned forward, watching the endless corridor of trees. "You think it's really ours?" she asked. Clara smiled faintly. "That's what the letter said." June traced invisible lines on the fogged window. "Do you think Arthur knew about us?" "I don't know," Clara answered, and she didn't. What she knew was that the map had drawn her like a magnet. The handwriting on it, the cryptic message, "Beneath the river, the roots still live," had stirred something inside her that logic couldn't quiet. When the car crested the final hill, the land opened wide. Below lay the Maple Creek Valley, a swath of forest bisected by a glimmering ribbon of water. At its edge sat a small cabin almost hidden by the bare trees. The shingles sagged. The wood was silvered from years of rain, and smoke no longer curled from the chimney. Yet even in its neglect, the place had a strange stillness, as if the world around it had stopped to listen. They parked near a leaning mailbox half buried in weeds. The name A. Jennings was barely legible on rusted metal. Clara's boots sank into damp ground as she stepped out. The air smelled of silt and cedar. The front porch groaned when she tried the steps. The key from the lawyer's packet turned smoothly in the lock, and the door opened with a sigh. Inside, the air was cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of old wood and river stone. June's eyes widened. "It's like a fairy tale cabin," she whispered. "Maybe one that forgot the ending," Clara replied softly. The interior was one large room, wooden beams, a stove, a small cot, and shelves lined with jars of screws, nails, and yellowed notebooks. Dust softened the outlines of everything. A window looked out toward the riverbank, where the current moved slow and dark beneath the mist. They spent the afternoon exploring the property. Behind the cabin, the earth sloped downward into a clearing, and beyond it, the land fell sharply toward the river. The sound of water was constant, steady, like breathing. June wandered near the edge of the trees, where she found a wooden sign half buried in moss. The letters were faint, but readable: Maple Hill, 1903A. J. "Looks like this land's older than both of us combined," Clara said. As daylight dimmed, she built a small fire in the stove, using the dry logs left stacked neatly in a corner, as though Arthur had always meant to return. The warmth filled the cabin with a comfortable hush. They ate canned soup, the spoons clinking softly against metal bowls. That night, the rain began. It started as a whisper against the roof, then deepened into a rhythmic drumming. June slept easily, curled up under a wool blanket on the cot, her sketchbook open beside her. Clara sat by the fire, reading through one of the old notebooks she had found. Most pages were filled with diagrams of roots water tables and hand-drawn symbols that looked like tree branches merging with rivers. She flipped a page and saw a single phrase scrawled across it: "The roots beneath, remember." Around midnight, a sound woke her, a faint, steady gurgle beneath the wooden floor. At first she thought it was runoff from the rain, but the rhythm was wrong. The sound pulsed deep and deliberate, like water, moving through hollow veins. She knelt, pressing her ear to the floorboards. The noise came from directly beneath the center of the cabin. When she lifted one of the loose planks near the stove, a thin draft rose from below, carrying the scent of damp soil. Beneath the floor was darkness, more than a crawl space, less than a cellar. She caught the glint of something wooden timbers, forming a narrow shaft that descended into the ground. She hesitated, then reached for her flashlight. The beam revealed a wooden ladder, old but intact, leading into a space carved out of packed earth. The walls were lined with intertwined roots, some thick as her arm, others finer than threads, forming what looked like a living web. At the bottom, she saw the suggestion of a tunnel curving into shadow. The sound of water came from there, a slow, rhythmic flow that felt alive. Clara June's small voice came from behind her. Clara turned quickly. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just go back to bed." But June was staring past her into the hole. "It looks like the tree's still growing," she whispered. Clara closed the plank carefully and drew the blanket tighter around June. "We'll look tomorrow, when it's light." Outside, the storm deepened. Rain pounded the roof, and thunder rolled across the hills. Beneath it all, Clara could still hear the faint heartbeat of water below. At dawn, Ethan Walker drove his pickup down the service road that wound toward Maple Creek. The rain had washed the forest clean, leaving a smell of wet earth and pine. Ethan's eyes were sharp from a sleepless night. His readings from the previous day had made no sense. The groundwater flow was reversing direction, as if something under the hill was pulling water inward instead of letting it run downstream. He stopped at the ridge overlooking the valley and set up his equipment. The hum of his analyzer broke the silence. The display flickered anomalous readings again. He frowned. "Still wrong," came a voice behind him. Ethan turned to see Deputy Marla Keene, a local law officer in her early 40s. She was tall and sturdy, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair tied back in a braid. Her uniform bore mud stains, and her expression carried the tired patience of someone used to small-town mysteries that rarely turned out well. "Morning, Marla," Ethan said. "You're early? Sheriff wanted me to check the site. People in town heard you're digging around where the new flood zone's supposed to be." She looked down at his instruments. "You finding ghosts? Or gold neither?" he said. "But there's something alive down there." She raised a brow. "Alive." He showed her the readings, erratic pressure shifts under the hill. Water shouldn't move like this. It's flowing uphill against gravity. Marla frowned. "You sure your fancy gadgets ain't just freezing from the cold wish?" That was it. He shut the device and stared toward the valley. "If they build that dam, whatever's under there is going to change the whole system, maybe more than anyone expects." Marla followed his gaze. "That land belongs to someone, doesn't it? Some Jennings girl inherited it." "Yeah," Ethan said slowly. "Guess I should pay her a visit." That evening, when the rain finally stopped, Clara stood on the porch, watching the swollen river drift by. The sunset bled through the clouds, staining the water crimson. June was inside, sketching the routes she remembered from the night before. The air was heavy with the smell of wet moss and iron. Somewhere downstream, a frog croaked, then fell silent. Clara pressed her hand to the wall of the cabin, feeling the faint vibration beneath her fingertips, the same slow rhythm as the night before. She whispered to herself, beneath the river, the roots still live, and in the distance the crunch of tires on gravel signaled the arrival of Ethan Walker's truck, winding its way up the muddy path toward the cabin under the hill. Morning arrived in streaks of silver and blue, a cold mist curling off the Maple Creek like steam from a sleeping giant. Clara Jennings stood outside the cabin mug of weak coffee, in hand watching the slow current move between the reeds. The air carried the metallic scent of wet soil after rain, and somewhere in the woods a woodpecker drummed faintly against bark. June was still asleep inside her sketchbook, clutched to her chest, pages filled with drawings of twisted roots and glowing lines. Clara hadn't told her what she saw under the floor the night before, not in detail. Some things were better left for daylight. After breakfast, the sisters began to clean the place properly. Dust rolled off the shelves in pale clouds, and the floorboards creaked in protest at every step. It was June who first pointed again to the loose plank near the stove. "It's breathing," she whispered. Indeed, a faint draft pulsed upward through the crack, like the slow exhale of something deep below. Clara knelt and pried the plank open again. The wooden ladder still waited there, the beam of her flashlight catching on damp walls. She hesitated, then glanced toward June. "We'll just look," she said. "If it feels unsafe, we go right back up." June nodded, eyes wide with both fear and excitement. The ladder groaned under Clara's weight, but held steady. The air grew cooler as she descended, the smell of soil thickening. June followed carefully. At the bottom lay a narrow chamber supported by old wooden beams that had fused with the roots of what must once have been a massive tree. The roots arched through the walls like ribs, dark and smooth, pulsing faintly with moisture. Clara's flashlight beam glided over carvings, spirals, leaf symbols, and branching veins etched deep into the wood. Some of them shimmered faintly, as if coated in a thin film of phosphorescent sap. June ran her fingers over one glowing spiral. "It's warm," she said. Clara shivered. The carvings formed patterns that seemed less decorative and more communicative, like a language that used shape instead of words. In the far corner of the chamber stood a small wooden chest, half buried in earth. Its hinges had rusted, but the lid opened easily. Inside were several notebooks bound with faded leather, each page crowded with neat handwriting and intricate sketches of water channels, geological layers, and tree root systems that mirrored river deltas. The handwriting matched the map she'd received in the letter. On the first page, underlined twice, was the name Arthur Jennings, followed by a date, May 4th, 1995. Clara's pulse quickened as she read the opening line. "If rivers are the veins of the land, then roots are its nerves. Both carry memory." Arthur's words told the story of a man haunted. He had been a civil engineer once celebrated for designing floodgates along the Connecticut River. But tragedy had struck in 1988 when a small hydroelectric dam he supervised collapsed after a storm killing dozens, including his young son Thomas. The disaster shattered him. He withdrew from society, left his job, and retreated into the forest, where he began building this place with his own hands. He wrote of his belief in a living current beneath the hills of Vermont, an ancient aquifer that intertwined with the roots of maple trees, carrying not just water, but what he called the consciousness of the forest. Arthur believed that if one listened closely, one could hear the flow of life whispering beneath the soil, urging balance healing wounds left by man's machines. Clara turned another page. It showed a hand-drawn diagram roots descending through layers of rock into a circular pool labeled Heartstream. At the edge of the sketch in faint pencil, he'd written, "Beneath the river, the roots still live." June pointed at the symbols carved on the walls. He drew the same ones here. Clara nodded slowly. It's like he was trying to talk to the earth. They lingered there, reading until the flashlight began to fade. When they climbed back up, the afternoon light filtering through the cabin's windows felt sharper, almost intrusive, as if the world above were less real than what lay below. Outside, the river gleamed like liquid glass. Clara sat on the porch, notebook in her lap, her mind tangled with Arthur's words. Was this what he meant by inheritance? Not property, but understanding. A few miles away, Ethan Walker leaned over his laptop inside his field tent, its walls fluttering under the wind. His data from the Maple Hill site scrolled in irregular patterns across the screen, unexplainable surges of hydraulic pressure beneath the proposed dam's foundation. He rubbed the back of his neck, frustration etching lines into his forehead. His assistant, Caleb Myers, entered, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee, his boots leaving tracks on the muddy tarp. "You look like you've been punched by the river," Caleb joked, handing him one. Ethan gave a tired half-smile. "Feels like it. The readings are worse today. The groundwater's moving uphill. That's not just physics breaking, it's infrastructure collapse waiting to happen." Caleb shrugged. "You think it's geological fault line, maybe?" Ethan shook his head. No fault lines here. This is organic. It's shifting like it's being redirected." He hesitated before saying, "There's a property right on top of it. Belongs to someone named Jennings? I think she's living there now." Caleb frowned. "The lady by the river, I saw lights there last night. Shouldn't she be evacuated if this whole area's turning into a sinkhole?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Ethan said. "But first I need proof. If I go to the agency now, they'll shut me down for fear-mongering." He looked toward the forest where the river wound unseen between trees. "Whatever's under there, it's awake." Back at the cabin, the evening air grew heavy with mist. June had gone to bed early, exhausted from excitement. Clara remained by the small table, reading through more of Arthur's notes. She found one dated only weeks before his death. "The sound has changed. The roots no longer whisper, they sing. It is not grief, but release. I believe the river forgives." She closed the book, her heart uneasy. She could almost hear it now, the faint hum under the floor, a low resonance that matched her pulse. She stood and pressed her palm to the wall. The vibration was stronger. It wasn't imagination. Something beneath the house was moving. The oil lamp flickered as a gust of wind slipped through the window cracks. Clara turned it down and looked toward the river through the glass. The water reflected the moon in broken fragments. Then for a moment she saw a light deep below the surface, soft amber pulsing like breath. Her breath caught. She whispered, "Arthur, what did you do down there?" Far across the ridge, Ethan stared at his monitors as the pressure reading spiked again 3 times higher than the previous night. The digital map bled red along the line where Maple Hill met the riverbank. He tapped the screen, muttering, "That's right under the Jennings property." He grabbed his jacket, heading for the truck. He had to warn her before the government surveyors started blasting test wells next week. The soil wouldn't hold. The storm clouds gathered once more above the valley, silent and gray. By the next morning, the quiet of Maple Hill had vanished. Clara Jennings woke to the growl of engines echoing across the valley. Through the cabin window, she saw trucks lined along the dirt road, white vehicles marked with blue corporate logos that read North Star Energy Solutions. Men in bright orange vests and hard hats were unloading survey equipment, their voices cutting through the mist like blades. The stillness that had cloaked the river was gone. Everything felt watchful, now disturbed. Clara stepped outside, her coat pulled tight against the chill. The sun was weak behind the clouds, a pale circle struggling to shine. June stood on the porch beside her, rubbing her eyes. "Who are they?" she whispered. Before Clara could answer, one of the men approached. He was tall, sharply dressed, despite the mud, clearly not a laborer. His helmet was spotless, his smile practiced. Mark Holloway, senior field manager for North Star, extended his gloved hand. He was in his 40s with tanned skin, neat brown hair, and eyes like coins, shiny, cold, transactional. "Miss Jennings," he said, his tone polite in a way that carried authority. "You're on the parcel identified as Sector C9. We're conducting geological assessments for the hydroelectric development downstream. I'd like a few minutes of your time." Clara hesitated. "Assessments for what purpose? Preliminary flood analysis." "Safety checks," Holloway said smoothly. "Of course, the state will compensate residents whose property lies within the impact zone. Frankly, this lot will be underwater within the year. I'd suggest you consider selling before that becomes less feasible." June frowned. "This is our home." Holloway's smile flickered. "Sentiment's a luxury kid. We build progress here." He turned and motioned toward a group of surveyors unpacking equipment. "My team will drill a few test cores. Won't take long." Clara stepped forward, blocking his path. "Not without permission." Before Holloway could respond, a familiar voice called from the road. "She's right, you can't just start drilling here." Ethan Walker strode toward the mud, splashing under his boots. His jacket was dusted with rain, his jaw set in irritation. The men recognized him. He was one of their contracted engineers, though not exactly loyal to the corporate line. Holloway's smile hardened. "Ah, Mr. Walker. You're assigned to Ridge Section, aren't you? I didn't expect you here." "I go where the data leads," Ethan replied. "And it's led me to this property." He turned to Clara, voice lower. "I need to talk to you." Clara nodded slightly, still tense. Holloway gave a curt nod to his crew. 10 minutes, he said, and walked away, barking orders. When they were alone, Ethan spoke quickly. "They're drilling test holes directly above the Mantic flow channel, the same anomaly I found in my survey. If they hit it, the pressure could destabilize the riverbed. You need to leave for a few days until I can stop them." Clara folded her arms. "Leave my home because of something they caused." "It's not just them," Ethan said. "The land's reacting. It's like the water's alive, redirecting itself through the roots. I've seen readings like that once before years ago during a flood in Wyoming. The earth moved water uphill to save itself." June listened silently, clutching the hem of her hoodie. "You sound like Uncle Arthur," she murmured. Ethan blinked. "Arthur Jennings." Clara nodded. "He was my father's cousin. He built this cabin." Ethan frowned thoughtfully. "That explains a lot." Thunder rumbled far off over the valley. The wind shifted. Holloway's team began setting up the drill near the old maple stump at the base of the hill, the same place Clara had found the faint glow beneath the soil. The first metallic bite of the drill hit the earth. The sound vibrated through the ground, sharp as teeth scraping bone. Then everything changed. The air thickened, humming faintly. The river's surface began to tremble, ripples spreading outward, though no wind blew. The drill motor sputtered, choked, and died. The ground shuddered once then, again deeper, more violent. Holloway stumbled backward, shouting orders. "Shut it down!" Now, but it was too late. From the base of the hill, the soil split with a cracking sound, and a surge of water burst upward, black and cold, carrying silt and roots. The Maple Creek had awakened. Ethan grabbed Clara's arm. "We have to close the channel." Clara didn't ask how he knew she already understood. They ran toward the cabin as the first wave of muddy water washed through the grass. June screamed after them, but Clara shouted for her to stay back. Inside, the floorboards quaked. The plank above the hidden hatch had already lifted on its own. Light, soft amber living pulsed from below. They descended together, the flashlight swinging wildly. The air in the root chamber shimmered with movement. The carvings glowed brighter now, the spirals pulsing in rhythm with the roaring water above. Roots writhed along the walls, thick and sinewy, alive. "It's moving," the flow, Ethan gasped. "Redirecting pressure through the tunnels." "God, it's like it knows." Clara pressed her hand against one of the roots. The glow intensified under her palm, spreading through the wood like veins filling with light. She felt something inside her chest respond, a deep, aching recognition that wasn't entirely her own. Arthur's words from the journal echoed in her mind. "The river remembers its own." "Help me," she whispered. The roots stirred, groaning like old timbers. The walls of the chamber flexed as the water rushed through unseen channels. Above them, the ground thundered with the force of diverted current. Ethan braced himself against the ladder, staring in disbelief as the light radiated outward from where Clara stood, tracing along the carved lines toward the ceiling. Outside, Holloway's men stumbled backward as the surge of water split into two streams veering around the drilling site instead of flooding it. The river carved itself a new path curving harmlessly toward the lower marshlands. The vibration ceased. Silence followed, an uncanny, absolute silence. Then the ground stilled. Ethan climbed back up first, helping Clara follow. The air outside was cool and sharp, carrying the smell of rain and sap. The Maple Creek had calmed its water, gliding smoothly as if nothing had happened. Holloway stood by his truck, drenched and pale, his authority stripped bare. "This area's unstable," he muttered. "We're done here. Pull the team." Clara met his gaze. "You can't control what was never yours." Holloway didn't reply. He only turned and barked for his crew to leave. Within minutes the valley was quiet again, except for the rustle of wind through wet leaves. Ethan watched the trucks disappear down the dirt road, then turned to Clara. "I don't think anyone will believe what just happened." "They don't have to," she said softly. "The land does." The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the river's surface. June ran down from the porch, throwing her arms around Clara's waist. "It stopped," she said breathlessly. "Yes," Clara replied, looking toward the water. "It stopped because it listened." Ethan smiled faintly, brushing mud from his hands. "I think your uncle was right. Nature's not something we study. It studies us back." They stood together by the edge of the river as the last traces of disturbance faded. Beneath their feet, deep within the hill, the roots pulsed once more, steady, alive, and grateful. A year slipped quietly through the valley of Maple Hill, soft as wind through maple leaves. The land had healed. The scars of machinery were overgrown with green again, the muddy trails reclaimed by moss, the river running clear and steady, like a promise kept. Spring had come and gone, summer had passed, and now autumn painted the hills in bronze and fire. The air carried the faint scent of smoke and syrup, and the sound of children's laughter rose from what had once been a lonely cabin by the river. The cabin had changed. Its wooden walls, once gray and splintered, were now warm honey gold under a fresh coat of varnish. The sign by the front gate read, "The Root Refuge," carved by hand into maple wood and polished to a soft gleam. It had become a place for those with nowhere else to go, a shelter for children, and a small learning center for visitors who came to study the forest's rebirth. At its heart, Clara Jennings moved like the quiet current of the river itself, calm, strong, tireless. She stood that morning on the porch, a shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Time had deepened her calm, but not dulled her vitality. There was something in her expression now that hadn't been there before, a peace earned, not given. Her hair, still chestnut brown, fell loose around her face, and when she smiled, the lines near her eyes softened rather than aged her. Inside the cabin hummed with gentle noise. Children were helping June arrange brushes and jars of paint on a long wooden table near the window. June Jennings, now 13, had grown taller and surer of herself. Her dark hair fell to her shoulders, often streaked with accidental smudges of blue or green paint. Her sketches had become something wondrous, luminous trees, glowing veins of light under soil and rivers that seemed to breathe. People said she painted like someone who could hear the earth. Perhaps she could. One of the children, Oliver, a boy of about 9 with sandy hair and freckles, tugged on Clara's sleeve. "Miss Clara, can we go feed the fox again?" His voice was small but eager. Oliver had arrived months earlier after losing his parents in a city fire. He rarely spoke of it, but he'd found comfort in the creatures of the forest. "Go on," Clara said, smiling, "but stay near the creek. And remember, he likes apples more than bread." The boy grinned and dashed off, clutching a small basket. Clara watched him disappear into the trees, then turned toward the meadow beyond the cabin. Ethan was there, kneeling beside a group of students as they measured the width of young maple saplings. Ethan Walker had changed too. His once restless energy had settled into purpose. His sandy blonde hair was longer now, his beard trimmed short, and his face carried the kind of contentment only found by people who had learned to listen to silence. He wore a faded green jacket patched at the elbows and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect without asking for it. The government had abandoned its dam project after the unexplained geological instability at Maple Hill, and Ethan had resigned from his corporate contract soon after. He had chosen instead to stay, to teach to rebuild, and to stay beside Clara. He looked up as she approached, brushing soil from his hands. "You know," he said, smiling, "the river's level hasn't shifted once this season. It's like it finally found peace." "Maybe it did," Clara said softly. "Or maybe it's listening." Ethan laughed. "Still think it talks to you?" She met his gaze. "Don't you?" Before he could answer, June came running from the cabin waving a sheet of paper. "I finished it," she said breathlessly, holding up a new painting. It showed the cabin under the hill at twilight roots, spreading beneath it like veins of gold glowing faintly against the dark soil. Above the sky shimmered with the same light as if the stars had fallen into the earth. Clara took the painting gently. "It's beautiful, June. It's not just roots," the girl said earnestly. "It's all of us, the land, the river, the trees. We're part of it now." Ethan crouched to her level, smiling. "Then you'd better sign it. Every artist deserves her mark." June grinned and wrote her initials at the bottom corner. For Uncle Arthur, she added in small letters. The mention of Arthur's name made Clara glance instinctively toward the cabin. Beneath the wooden floor, sealed beneath layers of reinforced planks, the tunnels still existed. No one went down there anymore, but at night faint light sometimes glowed through the seams, soft, rhythmic, alive. The roots still whispered, though now their voice was calm. That evening, the Root Refuge hosted a small gathering. Locals from the nearby town came bringing pies and music, celebrating the year's harvest. The place glowed with lantern-light laughter spilling across the yard. Even Marla Keene, the deputy who once distrusted the valley's strange happenings, arrived carrying jars of her homemade honey. "You've built something special here," she told Clara, her voice rough with sincerity. "You turned mystery into meaning? That's rare." Clara smiled. "It wasn't me. It was the land. I just listened." As night deepened, the guests slowly departed, their laughter fading into the rustle of leaves. June and the children were asleep in the loft. The fire in the stove burned low, its light flickering across the cabin walls. Outside, the river glimmered silver beneath the moon. Clara stepped onto the porch, pulling her shawl tighter. Ethan joined her 2 mugs of warm cider in hand. They stood side by side in silence, watching the mist rise over the water. Fireflies drifted lazily through the grass, their glow reflected in the river's surface. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Ethan asked quietly. Clara shook her head. "No. For the first time, I'm exactly where I belong." He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm. Together they watched as faint light shimmered beneath the ground at the base of the hill, the same golden glow that had once terrified her. Now it pulsed gently like the steady heartbeat of something content. Ethan smiled. "Looks like your uncle's roots are still awake." "Not his," Clara said softly. "Ours." For a long while, neither spoke. The river murmured below, carrying the sound of water over stone, an ancient rhythm, endless and forgiving. The air was cool and clear, filled with the scent of maple and earth. Clara turned to Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. The river never wanted gold, she said. It just wanted to be remembered. Ethan squeezed her hand, and together they watched the silver current shimmer under the moon, alive and eternal. Beneath them, unseen, the roots of the great maple pulsed with light, not in warning, not in sorrow, but in quiet gratitude. And so Maple Hill slept breathing with the rhythm of the earth, its story carried on the water forever. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or shining angels. They come quietly like roots beneath the soil, unseen, but alive. The story of Clara and the Maple Hill Valley reminds us that faith can exist even in silence, that God's hands work not only in heaven, but through the earth beneath our feet, through the kindness we show and the hope we refuse to surrender. When the river stirred and the roots glowed, it wasn't just nature awakening, it was grace revealing itself in the simplest form. God whispers through the wind, the water, and the hearts of those who choose to protect what He created. Like Clara, Each of us has the power to listen to heal and to make the world around us bloom again. If you believe that small acts of care still carry the light of God's miracle, share this story with someone you love. Comment below what this story means to you and write Amen if you feel His presence guiding your life too. Don't forget to subscribe, so together we can spread stories of faith, hope, and the quiet miracles that remind us God is still here in the river, in the roots, and in all of us.